Alright, everybody, this is Antonio Wolf here with my friends Hyperion and Joshua. And this is an epilogue discussion, overall commentary on the trial by Franz Kafka. I love this book. I liked it. I really liked it when I first heard it. But the more this is like the fourth reading. Well, the first actual reading. The other times I'd listened to it on audiobook. And I'm really glad. Really glad. Certainly reading allows you to pay a lot more attention to details than listening. I don't know, people who are like, oh, I get more detail when I listen. I'm like, the hell kind of cognition do you have? But yeah, this is a book that honestly I don't see myself ever tiring of. It's a book that I can probably read many more times throughout my life, and I'll probably get something new out of it every time. Even after our discussions, like I go back and look at the text, and I just get more things to interpret, to add.
Mm-hmm. Who recommended it to you?
You did, but as with many things,
how many years ago?
I'm moody about art. I'm really moody about art, and I just don't get to it until, for whatever reason, I get to it. But yeah, I mean, it's a famous book. Everybody says, "Oh yeah, it's good." I'm like, okay, fine.
It's very famous for its depiction of how cruel bureaucracy is, and just how unnecessarily complicated it is.
We'll go into that a little bit. So just for those watching, what you're seeing on your screen is what's going to be the condensed version of the entire. Overall, it has been almost a 23-hour long reading and commentary series on the trial. I mean, if that ain't worthy, I don't know what is. I've seen people do analyses of video games this long, and nowhere near as interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, okay, so general things overall. There are things I was going to say, but okay, it goes into the epilogue. It's still fun. It's going to be part of the playlist. What was he guilty of in the end? My condensation of bringing together all the problems of Joseph K's life and who he was is he was guilty of failing to be a person. And you're like, okay, that's pretty weird. Like, how can you fail to be a person? Like, well, a person in a vague sense, because I'm not going to go into any full concepts here, but I'm going to give an outline. First, here's what Joseph K is generally guilty of on specific details. He's extremely selfish. He doesn't love or respect anybody. He's a liar. He's a self-deceiving liar. He alienates other people because he believes that that's how you remain free. And he loves power. He loves money, but mostly he loves power. And if you get too bound up with people, that kind of decreases that gives them power over you. And if you actually care about that woman that you call your girlfriend or whatever, she might actually be able to get you to do things by making you feel bad. Can't allow that. So he closes himself off to everybody. Ultimately, I mean, he has this impenetrable wall between his inner life and the way he relates to other people. So he ends up treating all his relationships as transactional. He doesn't really seem to have any actual feelings for family. He doesn't seem to ever really had a romance, and not a single person who is his friend. He has acquaintances, business contacts. Beyond that, nothing. Another one is he, despite that he complains a lot about how he just doesn't know what he's guilty of, he hasn't been told, and this jury, the court doesn't tell him anything, as to what he has done wrong. K himself is a mini version of what he believes the court to be. Not how the court actually is, but how he believes the court to be. And this is one of the issues he has. He projects himself onto everything and everyone else. So K silently judges everybody and acts accordingly based on his judgments and convictions within himself. And he never tells these people what they have been judged for and why, so that they could defend themselves to him. Which is what his big complaint is. He's like, if I don't know what I'm charged with, how can I defend myself against this court? How can I defend myself against these charges? Well, that's what he does with everybody. Another one, because of his alienation, it's so extreme that he misinterprets people helping him as them trying to somehow underhandedly harm him, which is insane. He is arrogant, he is proud, he assumes that he's God's gift to the earth. He already assumes that he knows everything worth knowing. He overestimates his capacities and knowledge. Everybody is inferior to him, which is why he for one, he doesn't want to ask for help because he doesn't want anybody who have any knowledge of his internal life, which would open him up. Two, since he thinks everybody's inferior, he's like, what could they do for me anyways? If I can't do anything, they can do even less. So that arrogance then leads to him categorically denying not just that he's guilty of anything specific, but that he could be guilty, at all, for anything. Just guilty. He says categorically denies guilt. This is dumb and stupid because he doesn't even know what the law is. And just because you don't know what the law is doesn't mean that you aren't guilty when you break the law. And the most important thing which binds all these together is there is a lack of responsibility that he fails to accept for everything that happens in his life. And he's, besides being clearly antisocial in many ways, psychopathic, and antisocial, not even it is in a malicious way, definitely, but it's also antisocial in just a completely inept way. We find out throughout the story that Kay's a moron, a real blockhead. There's a character named Block the Merchant, who is a blockhead more so than Kay, but Kay is also a blockhead himself. He does not get hints at all, even when it's just straight out told to him. He just doesn't get it. And it's not just that he doesn't get it, he doesn't want to get it. Even when he's told certain things, he just goes ahead and denies it. And he says, oh no, that can't be true. Yeah, despite the fact that he has no basis to think of this, he just decides he doesn't want to believe it. And he's like, oh, I'll just find my, it's like wanting your alternative facts, so to say. And he literally just makes shit up for himself. And he's like, oh no, things must actually be this way. Based on what? Nothing. So, besides being antisocial, he has these things in which he doesn't even know what the hell he wants. he's adamant that he's innocent, and when people keep bringing up like, yes, it's because you're innocent, you will have no problem, and he's like, it irritates him that they keep saying it. It irritates him that they call him guilty. You can't make him happy. Nothing you do can possibly make this guy happy. Nothing he does can make him happy. He just doesn't know what he wants, and he can't make can't make his mind up, and he doesn't notice that this is completely insane. At first he wants to not be called guilty. Then when he says like, you're an innocent man, by Tittarelli, he gets pissed off about that. He gets pissed off that certain things are not being done. Then he gets pissed off that they are being done. He gets pissed off that somebody has ignored him. Then he gets pissed off that they're not ignoring him. The guy is just not all there, apparently. And yet it's not that he's not all there, like because he himself notes and pays attention that he's being contradictory a lot of times, and he just decides to just overlook it and move on, do nothing about it. So what does this have to do with personality? The main thing is responsibility. A person is an ethical and moral being, which is tied to being a free social being, very strongly tied. So being this antisocial recluse who is only out there for himself is a failure to be a person. You detach yourself from ethical life. You have no community, and a person only exists in community. And this is not only a thing of just like, you ought to. Just pay attention to the story. The way the story moves shows that Kay has come to his trial precisely because of this disconnect he has with other people, this alienation. That this alienation has objectively manifest problems for him that he cannot ignore. Problems that just are the facts. They are the case. The same way that you punch a wall, and as hard as you punch it is about as hard as the wall will, assume that it's not a cheap ass like wall now, like nowadays, which are made of this stuff called sheetrock, which is just basically some kind of like a plaster, which you can punch through that, won't break your hand. But if you try to punch against a brick wall, as hard as you punch it is about as hard as the brick wall is going to resist. So this alienation is like Kay punching a wall and breaking his bones, and not noticing it, and then wondering like, why did my hand break? Why is my wrist broken? Well, you punched the wall, motherfucker. But he's not cognizant that alienation leads to this, despite the fact that it objectively does. A lot of his problems a lot of his complaints are due to his failure to find that information, only because he decides that he refuses to ask for help of any kind from anybody, even strangers. He's just obsessed to keep everyone away from his inner life. So the thing about so that's failure to be a person in community, which leads to one's self-destruction, without a doubt. This is not a question. This is not something that's a hypothetical. This is the fact that if you fail to be in a community, you fail to be a person. So let's see. Another thing about personality is that a person is a subject. Now, Kay pretends to be a subject who is responsible, but his actions and words show otherwise. He assumes that no one should expect anything of him. Like, for the funniest thing is, when he's told to go with the Italian to show him around the city, Kay shows up early in the morning at the office. And he's saying, he says to himself that they shouldn't even, that nobody would expect him to, come in early, they should be thankful, and they should be, praise him because, it shows that, he actually cares. That's not something that ought to be expected of him, despite the fact that if you think about it, somebody who works in a bank of importance and somebody who's like sought after for tasks as much as Kay is, the job would definitely want you there early. So, but they're pretty nice with him at his job. His boss doesn't seem to mind that he spends most of his day just twiddling his thumbs, staring out the window, bumming about, and doing nothing. Or if he's not there, he just leaves on unspecified errands, trying to underhandedly or sneaking about, trying to find ways to get information about the trial in the court without asking directly. So whenever it comes to responsibilities, Kay never accepts that he has any responsibilities. I don't think there's anywhere in the story that he ever actually accepts it. He may speak about it, but he never actually acts in any way. That shows that he really thinks that he has any responsibilities. And when he carries out those responsibilities, he kind of he acts as if, they're extra things that he has done and that other people should notice and praise him for it, which is really, really stupid. Beyond that, for everything that he fucks up, he never takes responsibility for it. As I said, his alienation brings him to do a lot of stupid things, and he never accepts it. And the ultimate form of this is his failure to accept his guilt. The guilt which rightfully the court never told him, because the whole point of not telling him was so that he couldn't game the trial, which you can't do anyways, but just a precaution. Another thing is related to his lack of community. Kay is indifferent and apathetic, and he's proud of this. He's proud of being indifferent towards the trial, being indifferent towards the stuff that happens in his life. He says and everything just kind of rubs off me like oil and water. He's alien to the extent that he believes that others and the problems of life simply wash over and pass him. But if you're this disconnected from life, if you're not part of a community, if you don't have any friends, if you don't have any lovers, if you don't have any family, who are you? Ultimately, you're not someone. You're not a person. You have no connections. You have no commitments. And yet, just like Kay, you die like a dog, and nobody remembers you for anything. Stated at the end of the story that he fears that his shame will outlive him, and indeed, that's probably the only thing people will remember. That Kay was this guy who had a trial, couldn't handle it, and basically killed himself. He didn't stab himself in the end, but he killed himself in that he allowed all this to happen to him. He could have acted in many ways to engage things, to move things along in a different way, but he just decided not to. So, if that's not a failure to be a person, if that's not a failure to be a human being, a subject, I don't know what is. And indeed, at least in the Judeo-Christian view, probably in the Muslim view as well, this is probably the greatest sin of all, besides and I not explicitly, because explicitly the greatest sin of all is pride, and there is a huge element of pride here as to Kay. One could say that probably this does stem ultimately from pride, although I think pride here is not really the cause so much as the effect of his alienation. And his alienation is due to a misunderstanding of what it is to be a person, what it is to be free. Because Kay thinks freedom is just this disconnect, where nothing ties you down. Whereas freedom is not that. That's not what it is to be free, and that's not how you engage life. That's not how you can engage a trial. Which is why his trial never, as far as he could tell, never moved on when he was trying to engage it as this legal process of trial. He was looking at the formalities of trial. And then, when he was doing that, nothing happened. It was just stalling and stalling and stalling, which is what protraction is. So that's the general view I have of this. That it's great. This is a great story. It is perfect, despite the fact that it's incomplete. Its incompleteness is part of its perfection, for sure. Kafka could have explained a lot of things more clearly, but it's a good thing he didn't. The fact that the book is, in many ways, obvious to those who can see and not obvious to those who can't, is perfect. It's exactly what an artwork should be. This is the nature of the esoteric and the spiritual. Ultimately, it's literally there in the open, but it's not for those who aren't capable and ready for it. It's not for those who don't take the time to bother looking into it. It's not hidden stuff. It used to be, but nowadays, if you actually care nowadays, even in Kafka's day, if you actually care, you can just look into things yourself and find it. Nobody's gonna throw you in jail. They probably throw you in jail in certain places if you publicly talked about it. But as far as knowing things, nah. Getting back to the whole personality thing, as being probably the ultimate sin. Failing to be a person, failing to be a subject. In Christianity and Judaism, the final judgment is of so much importance, of metaphysical importance, that there is nothing more important ultimately. You are so radically free, particularly in Christianity, more so than Judaism, that to deny your own freedom, to fail to become a person, is basically to deny the gift of God, which is stupidity of the utmost. What other thoughts would you guys have on that, on the general book?
You said it all.
Yeah.
What am I gonna add to that?
I don't know. Favorite part? What is your favorite chapter?
I like 3 a lot. I like 9 a whole lot.
Yeah, 3 I really like.
7 is really good, but it's more like 3 chapters.
Mm-hmm.
The part with the artist, I thought, was one of the most eye-opening parts of the book.
Oh, what'd you think of
that? For a lot of reasons. First of all, when he talked about the 3 outcomes of the trial, besides being found guilty, which is first of all, it's absolute acquittal, I believe.
Yeah.
Let me look up the particular words.
Yeah, absolute acquittal, apparent acquittal, protraction, or deferment.
Yeah. No, I thought those were... I don't know. I think it's just very important to the message of, well, how are you supposed to deal with your trial? We all have trials. Obviously, absolute acquittal, none of us are gonna receive that. like you were saying when we read that chapter, only fucking Buddha or Jesus or someone like a saint, only someone like that can get an absolute acquittal. But these other options of these fake acquittals, like a apparent acquittal or deferment, is that the other one?
Deferment isn't even acquittal. It's just
Yeah.
thinking that you gaming the system by stalling.
Yeah. Those are not the solutions.
Yeah. Okay, something that came up to mind for the first time yesterday when I was writing out the presentation is there is a contradiction that's not brought up even by Kay, despite the fact that it's the strongest contradiction of them all in probably the entire book. In chapter 1 and another chapter, I have it here. Where is it? Well, in chapter 1, Kay's told that he's like, how do you know you got the right person? And they're like, well, we know. The policemen tell them. The law says that it's written in the law that it's guilt that draws out the court and its officials. So it's like the court doesn't send out officers into the general population trying to find guilty people. No, like the guilty people themselves are already pointed out, and so they send the officers to then check who they are, what they're like, and what they should be indicted. So first is just a general pinpointing of guilt. And so they say, like, there can be no error in the fact that we arrested you. You are guilty now of what we don't know, but we just know that you're guilty. We know that we were sent here because you are guilty of something. You've been indicted. The question is then, of course, what's going to happen in the trial. Now that's in contradiction to the very possibility of absolute acquittal or actual acquittal. Because those who get actual acquittal were the ones who were innocent from the beginning. But if they were innocent from the beginning, how did they get caught up in the court? So that's a genuine contradiction in the law. The law says that it's the guilty who draw the court. But if that was the case, then how would there ever be any acquittals if only the guilty are ever put on trial? But there have been actual acquittals, absolute acquittals. They may be legends. It's said that they're only legends. Nobody's ever known anyone personally. But then again, they've also covered. It's also covered in the story that nobody really knows the final judgments. They're not reported anywhere. The judges themselves don't know. The people below the judges know even less. So nobody's entirely sure if. It's not that it doesn't happen. It's even related that if it happens, the entire record is erased anyways, as if it never happened. So we assume that it's supremely rare. And it probably is rare, but how rare actually is it? And this still brings up the question, how could this happen in the first place if it's the guilty who draw the court to themselves? And to me, this does require you have to divide the court into the lower court and the higher court.
Yeah.
Indictments are sent. Everything that matters is sent by the higher courts. Nothing begins in the lower courts and ends in the lower courts, really. So an indictment is sent from the higher court. That then, the court then goes out, sends the officials, watches, whatever. As far as the lower court is concerned, they wouldn't know the difference between a charge which was for something that has happened, or an anticipatory charge for something that may happen. And this is where the story of Job is the story, I think, for this one. Which is, Job was put on trial, not for something that he did do, but for something that Satan claimed he might do. And the trial was to see what would he do. So in that case, however, Job was acquitted. He passed the trial. It was revealed that he was in fact innocent. But as far as the lower courts are concerned, they're never the ones who could know real innocence, because they're not the ones who give that verdict or have the power to give it, let alone know it. All they know is guilt, and there is probably an assumption of guilt because of one there is a drawing, there is a truth to that, the guilt draws the court to it. But for these people for whom the guilt has not drawn anything to them, but is simply an anticipatory charge from above, for them, the court may find it weird that, okay, well, this person doesn't show the regular characteristics of somebody guilty. Nonetheless, the procedures of the trials have to be carried out. And as with Job, the trials can be heavy. Job's life is destroyed. And the trial was to see, was Job pious because God had been so good to him? Or was Job pious because Job knows that, God is the one true God, and, it's whatever God wills, whether we see it as good or not is irrelevant. Ultimately, God cannot be wrong. So Job goes ahead and does not curse God, does not blame God for anything. But Job is interesting in that Job also never accepts that he's guilty of anything. Now it's said that Job knows, which is doubtful to me, that Job knows that he has done nothing. And he has friends that come and try to talk him as to explain to him why this has happened to him, why his trial has come. And a few of them are like, you must have done something wrong, blah, blah, blah. And Job just does not accept those. Which, to me, is not necessarily good. Now, it's not the sense that, one ought to have doubts. Necessarily. In a strong sense. There is a sense in which because there's a sense of knowing that I did not knowingly will something bad. But there's a big difference between that and having done something bad unknowingly. Job may know, the first one, that he knows that he's never done consciously anything bad or anything wrong. There's no way he could know that he's never just actually done anything wrong. So his not accepting that is an incoherent part of the story, in my view. But still, God overlooks that and says, Job, well, you're right. You weren't guilty of anything. As for why this trial happens, Job wants God to explain to him, and God just says, I'm God, you're Job. You couldn't understand me. Did you make the Leviathan? Did you make the behemoth? Did you make the firmament? No, I don't think so. You couldn't understand. Here's your life back. It's even better than before. Goodbye.
Now, one thing that's interesting about that story, and just like Judaism in general, it's Satan is, of course, the accuser. And Judaism in general has a bit of a legalistic undertone to it. Moses brings the people God's law. Undertone. Well, you know what I mean. It's very it's about laws.
Yeah.
So there's a very good reason why Kafka would use the legal metaphor for, the trial of life.
Yep. Definitely. So anyways, Job is one is which an innocent person has been tried and they've been acquitted in this life. The other instance of actual acquittal in the Bible is one Jesus of Nazareth. Where, Jesus being arrested, then crucified. One can say that here, whereas in Job, the lower court is allowed to carry out the trial, and the trial is not an error. It's this is what it makes this an incoherent thing, that if there are actual acquittals, it cannot be true that only the guilty draw the court. Even though it is true that the guilty draw the court, but it could be that it's not just simply being drawn. The court itself also may go to an individual and place them on trial anyways.
Well,
and the lower court can't tell the difference.
Of original sin, like we were talking about last time. In terms of, okay, I don't know how Judaism feels about it, but in Christianity at least, with the idea of the original sin is that we are all sinners no matter what we do. So the law is drawn by guilt. The law gets everyone then.
Indeed.
Everyone has a trial.
Right, exactly. But then Jesus was not born with original sin, yet he got a trial too.
Yeah.
And unlike Job's trial gets halted from above. The higher court, God, the law, intervenes directly and stops it and says you're acquitted. Jesus is not. Jesus, his trial is allowed to go all the way to conviction on the lower courts. Then immediately after the conviction is done, he's crucified, he dies, it's overturned.
Well, but also Jesus chose his own trial.
It's not just him. Right. So Jesus is...
Right. What I mean. Like, he set up the whole situation. His plan was to be crucified. He had to be.
Was it?
Yeah. I mean, how was it not?
Well, there's a sense in which everybody does that, and logically it must be the case that is this. So that's what it is, that one brings the trial upon himself.
Yeah, but it's a different level with Jesus, though.
Yeah. With Jesus is a different level, but still there's a level in which his is similar to ours, because he himself, at least in the Bible, has the moment of doubt and suffering, which was an essential moment to prove his own divinity. The fact that he had a moment of doubt in himself as God. But the point is, and I think Jesus can be generalized to martyrdom and as such, that there may be people who are innocent, who nonetheless are convicted, but only on the lower court, and the overturning does not happen in this world, but only in the next one.
You must lose your life to gain your life.
So that's the extreme of actual acquittal, because in the story we don't get any, because one, he doesn't tell us which ones. I'm just making some educated assumptions here. that the main ones are Job and the main one is Jesus, because these are the only two that biblically are available. The other ones of Elijah and Enoch, theirs isn't really a story of a trial. They had a trial as in they had a life, but they didn't have a trial like the same way that they had a life of suffering like Job did or Jesus did. So anyways, that's how I make sense of of how it makes sense that one, the court is drawn by guilt, and for the vast majority it will be the case that they are guilty, but there are some who aren't. But the trial has been designated to them in anticipation to see if they really are innocent or not. Because it may be the case that you are innocent at first. But what if you had only been innocent because you hadn't been given a situation in which you would sin? So, and that also would make sense as a trial with the story. But the Kay's trial is not about that. Kay is already guilty when we get to him. So anyways, that's just something interesting. It's a contradiction, but it's not an absolute contradiction. I think the first time I read this, my favorite chapters was chapter 3 and I think chapter 7, the one with the one where he first meets which is it? Okay, chapter 6, because it has the portion where like it just sounds like the court is insane about how like the way they treat lawyers and all these other things, and how the lawyers are unofficial, and that's the main point that people get the whole like bureaucracy interpretation from.
Yeah.
And then chapter 7 where Block was really entertaining to me.
Right.
This time, my favorites, chapter 3 still remains a favorite. Chapter 9 is definitely. And which ones? I think those are the two that stand out to me more than the other ones this time. Let's see, what else? On the parable of before the law, there's so much that can be said about that. And we did it almost 4 hours, almost 3 hours on that. No. In total that chapter was almost 4 hours, but just that section was 3 hours. And I still found things to think about that after. So let's see, what are things that I came up with that? One of the things I thought about is we didn't think, and again it isn't brought in like the interpretations in that chapter, as to the man from the countryside comes to to seek the law, to seek entrance to the law, and nobody asks why. It's just said like, oh, everybody wants to know the law. Why? Because like when you think about it, it's not obvious. Well, on a metaphysical, absolutely abstract metaphysical level, yeah, it's obvious. But on the level of just bring this down to the concreteness, why? Why does anybody seek out the law, whether it be the regular law or the law? And what I think is that nobody does as such. People seek out the law because there's a problem which they have with the law, or a problem they think the law may solve, or they're looking to do something which they're worried might be in conflict with the law. Besides that, I don't see why one would seek out the law as such. Just to know it. The law, the law. Yeah, there is a way in which definitely certain people seek that out just to know it, just because it is interesting in itself. It's mentioned by certain characters that there's just this strange, enigmatic attraction that the law has for people. That's an attractive subject. People just find it interesting for whatever reason. But in having a problem with the law, one of those things is also that you're guilty. I didn't even talk. This is my first interpretation. Like when I first read it, and I didn't even talk about it when we were talking about it. The gatekeeper tells the man that he cannot enter the law now, but maybe at some later time. And then the man decides to just get a stool, which the gatekeeper gives him, and he just sits there for the rest of his life. And obviously this is a foolish thing to do, that the man misinterprets. He's like, oh, well, if I'm not allowed now, maybe I'll be allowed later. And this
dies.
Yeah, this is a misinterpretation in the level that he thought that it was about time in this world, but it's not about time. It's not about being allowed at 1 p.m. but not allowed at 3 p.m. or on a certain day. It's not about that. He has come at the wrong time, but not natural time. He has come at the wrong time of his life because he's not yet mature enough. He's not ready to enter the law. And instead of going back into the world, getting more experience, becoming more mature, and then coming back when he's ready, he decides instead to arrest himself. He stops his life completely, just with the hope of getting into the law, by doing nothing.
So you think he should have gone around, went somewhere else instead of barging in? Because my interpretation was always that dude should have just barged in.
Well, there is a layer to that, because that's one thing he could have done. He could have been like, okay, I'm not allowed in now. All right, I'll go out and get more knowledge and things, and maybe he would have found out a thing or two about the law without having been there. I mean, it's not like snippets don't exist. So as for him barging through, the gatekeeper himself denies him and says jokes, go ahead and try if you don't believe me. And he's like, but he tells the whole story that there's more guards behind every door, and each one is more powerful than the last, and he can't even bear to look at the third one. Now, the man could have tried the guard's claim, but he simply did not. The law is important enough, however, that this man spent the rest of his material fortune in life hoping to enter it. So, if this isn't important, then if it's this important to him, indeed, he should have tried to barge in. Why not? If it's important enough to literally waste all your money and the rest of your life until you die, just sitting there, it's important enough that you might as well say, like, try your chances, barge into heaven.
You get beat up by the guards? I don't know, that's probably something you have to do to reach the law.
Indeed. So had he tried, I think two things could be said to have could happen. One, this itself was part of the test. It's I mean, like, this already gets into the meta things, like the very title, Before the Law. When you are before the law, what is happening? One, he's before the law in the sense that he hasn't yet gone into it, so he's before it. He's also before in that to be before the law, he's already being he's being set for judgment. Or rather, he is being judged right then and there. He thinks that the law is over there, but already in being before the law is now fully present. And he is within the law, and he doesn't realize it. And the judgment is happening in his very action of trying to get into it. So, this now being a trial in having come before the law, it could be said that part of it would have been, or might have been, that he should go and say, well, who are you to tell me, what the law is? And I need to go see the law for myself. So, had this been the requirement for what would make him ready and worthy and mature enough to enter the law, then the guard probably would have just gone like, there you go, you passed the trick question, or you passed the test. Walk right in.
Or he might have actually been stopped, but that would have been important for him to know too.
Yeah. So the second one is, if he wasn't ready, he could have been beat back, because even though it's right to challenge the authority, which doesn't have authority, or at least that hasn't proven itself to you to have authority. So challenging the authority rightly for the wrong reasons and by the wrong means, maybe the way, because if the guard tells you you're not allowed in yet, thinking that you're going to barge in doesn't make sense anyway. There's no way, like the very idea of forcing yourself into the law is nonsense. You can't enter the law by sheer physical power. You can't enter the law by just merely wanting it a lot. He clearly wanted a lot. He gave up everything else in his life. But it's not enough. It's required. It's a necessary thing, but it's not sufficient to get you in. Which goes into the whole thing that he gets exasperated and worried about the fact that he didn't expect all this trouble to be involved in trying to just get into the law, because he thought the law was just open all the time to everyone at any time. But clearly it's not. Now there's a second thematic there that I hadn't even thought of before. The gatekeeper isn't safeguarding the law. The law doesn't need any protection. So what's the gatekeeper doing? Why is the gatekeeper there? It's to safeguard the man. Because the man doesn't know the law. He thinks he can stand before it. He thinks he's ready for judgment. But he's not.
Right.
Now the gatekeeper could be negligent and say like, I don't care then, fine, you do you. Go ahead, walk right in. And the man steps before the law. And we know what happens to the man who steps before the law who's not ready. They die. They're killed. It's this goes along with the whole Old Testament thing about, entering the Holy of Holies. That unless you were purified and tried and tested, entering that room was a death sentence. So this interpretation isn't brought up by the priest in that chapter. That this whole thing of the trial is not to keep you out of the law; it's to protect you from your own stupidity of entering too soon when you are not worthy, when when you are still guilty, too guilty, so guilty that you'll be immediately judged and destroyed. So in the story, Kay has this whole thing like, where was the priest? Well, where was the judge, the high judge that I never met? Where was the high court that I never reached? When you think about it, in this light, and it makes sense with all that we had said before during the readings, that it's clear that the court was not there to convict anybody. The court was there to do the opposite. It was there to help people. It was there to help people pass these trials. That the trials were there to save people, not to condemn them. And that everybody who just says like, I want to skip straight to the higher courts, please. But what if somebody did do that? Well, what would happen? You may lie to the lower court. This is why protraction, and this is why apparent acquittals are possible. You can't lie to the higher court. You can't do this whole runaround. And there's no delay in justice over there. So
I think there's also something very significant in the fact that 3 guards are mentioned. Of course, 3, just the presence of the number alone should make you question it. But there is I heard something recently about how with Judaism, if one's to convert to Judaism, the rabbi has to reject you 3 times before you're accepted. That always happens.
Oh yeah, that's and that's part of the whole thing, like that. That's what a trial is, anyways, right? That a trial is this thing that immediately denies you. I mean, a thing that an event, an object, a person that arrests you, it stops you, and the whole point is that you're not supposed to give up there. You're supposed to power through one way or another. Not that you're going to force yourself and barge in through the trial. You can't do that. But you're supposed to. You have to navigate it.
For your failure.
Yeah, you have to navigate it, and you have to know how to navigate it. And that's part, and that's part of like the whole thing of don't accept a no, especially if you don't know that no is justified or not. There might be plenty of no's in your life, plenty of things that get in your way. That might be unavoidable. That might have nothing to do with anything you've done. They're just obstacles that you just have to navigate, and you navigate them, and you don't give up. Yeah, and especially for this, you cannot give up on the law. You cannot give up on the trial. It's the highest thing. It's like the most worthy thing. Like to give up on that, that's what's with such pitiful things when you really think about it. Pithy things is just a huge mistake. It's like it's somebody who, it's melodramatic teenagers usually. You have your first romance, your heart is broken, and you're like, oh, I just don't want to live anymore. What kind of dumb shit is that? You get one failure, you get one little block in front of you, and that's it. You're going to give up on the rest?
Well, it's also there's 2 things. Like, first of all, you can't just accept defeat and not try again. But you do also need to accept your defeat at the same time, acknowledge it as defeat, and figure out where you went wrong and how you can succeed. Part of the problem with Kay is, more so earlier in the novel, is he denies in the first place that he's defeated. He's like, no, this whole trial is bullshit, I'm just innocent, we should end this. And it's like a denial of the judgment placed upon him. But what we find later in the novel is sort of what you're talking about, of just this, not acceptance, but like resignment to, oh, I'm found guilty, that's it, I can't do anything about it.
Indeed, that's
You
that's
can't
something we didn't talk
deny
about.
it, you can't resign yourself to it. You have to accept it and fight it.
Indeed, and this is how I interpret that actual acquittal or absolute acquittal is possible for everyone. You may actually begin guilty, but you can be ultimately acquitted. But in order to do so, you have to do exactly what you said. Like, and it's what Lainey tells him when he first meets her. She tells him, you have to admit your guilt. You have to confess. And he doesn't want to, because for some reason, all of them, as we saw in the book, because Bloch has this intimation as well, all of them have this intimation, which it's not justified really from anything, that to admit any guilt is to admit final and absolute guilt. And that's not necessarily the case. That if you admit your guilt, it's a finite guilt. Oh, well, yes, I made the mistake here and there. I'm a terrible person. I acknowledge it. I'll do better. But acknowledging is like real acknowledgement. It's not just like, oh yeah, I get it. I know. Goodbye. No, it's, you really take it in and you learn. And if you do that, if you can admit that finite guilt, it really becomes a finite guilt. And the judgment, the conviction is just as finite. And the finite just vanishes away. And in you being able to make that guilt a finite moment of yourself, makes you capable of getting that final absolution. Which is what the story of spiritual development is, overall. That we may begin in darkness, we may begin in sin, original sin, whatever it is, finitude, evil. But as we grow, we make that merely a moment of our lives, and because it becomes a moment of our life and becomes past, there's that beautiful quote by Schelling, right? About the past, that no man has a past until it's actually like he's let it go of his present, because so long as like you keep recalling the past, it doesn't matter that a thing happened 20 years ago. If it still is the thing that's repeating today in the present, this is the thing that's, you go, it's like that thing caused me 20 years ago to be this way, then the past is not really past, it's still present. It's not until you finally let go of that, which it finally becomes finitized. It finally only becomes a mere moment. It doesn't become your entire life. And the trial isn't exactly making that a mere moment. And if you can make that mere moment, you accept the guilt, you accept the finitude, you say, okay, I made this mistake, moving on. But you move on in a productive way and not in an indifferent way, because that's what Kay and all these people want to do. They think that moving on is indifferent, like the way you move on a number line, or the way you move on in a timeline, of just like sheer abstractions. That's not what moving on is.
I mean, there's two different types of indifference, and I feel like it's hard to describe them. There's one that's not taking it seriously in a way that's harmful. And then there's one that comes from the understanding of the finitude of it, and that it isn't fully serious in some way.
The proper indifference is the indifference of it's more of a stoic indifference. Not that the rest of the world doesn't matter, but that you understand the conditions, you accept them, and you navigate them. Because what's the point of doing otherwise? Like the world is as it is. The facts are the facts. If your leg is broken, your leg is broken. It doesn't. There's no point in complaining about it. There's no point in being angry about it. If you can fix it, fix it. If you can't, start learning to live with it. There's nothing else to be done. And it's not to say that you don't do anything. It's not that if somebody broke your leg, don't go and hold that person responsible. No, that person ought to be held responsible. But you do what you can do, and what you can't do, well, that's just part of the trial. It's one of those conditions which you might deserve, you might not deserve. This is something I don't worry about. My mom's into a lot of spiritual stuff, and she's like, I don't know what I did in my prior life. I'm like, maybe you did, maybe you didn't. What would be the difference ultimately? Even if you buy that, okay, fine. There's plenty of reasons in which there are actual contingencies. Not everything that happens to you is something that was destined from eternity. There are some people who believe that, but whether you believe that or not, it makes no difference. You have to deal with what you have here now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think the important thing that this sort of perspective is supposed to push you towards is to just do what's right and not care about whatever the consequences are for doing whatever that is. Because those don't matter. If doing the right thing gets you killed, well, who cares? You should do the right thing.
Yeah, there's an element to that. There's also a danger to that. But so let's see. Continue on with the thing about the parable of the law. So the guy spends the rest of his life there, doesn't do anything, and then he dies. And as he's dying, he sees the shining light of the law, from behind the gatekeeper and the door. And that's interesting. Because the man attains his desire to enter and know the law, but only after earthly life. Now, however, he will stand before the law and not before a gatekeeper. If he was unworthy in life, he can expect a little more in death. Judgment, true and just, is assured, but what could a man who arrested himself expect? Even the law cannot judge where there has been no deed, but the man's one deed is his decision to engage no deed and to simply wait for the law to let him in. Stalling the trial is itself a crime against the law. So, in dying, everybody, if you don't get to the law during life, don't worry. Everybody meets the maker. So there's no hurry for that, really, when you think about it. But suppose that he had been allowed, like I said before, had the guard just been negligent and said, okay, fine, go ahead, see if you see what you find in the law, and he would have gone to the law. What would have happened? He was unworthy then. He's definitely unworthy afterwards. At least from the finite perspective. From the infinite perspective, you can look at this in more Christian way, from the idea of Christian love, in which he does enter the law in the end. As the priest says at the end of chapter 9, the court receives you when you come, and it sees you off when you go. In the end, the law receives everybody. And does not really keep anybody out, ultimately. And insofar as you are purified from, the material shackles and limitations, at least for a moment, you are purified enough that you may be in contact with the law directly. But if a lot of mystical accounts can be taken into account, such as Swedenborg or even Steiner, there's a point in which your individuality reasserts itself, and because the law is just so pure that you cannot withstand its presence. So you separate yourself from God, and that's what hell is, according to so many views. So yeah,
Great book,
beyond
10
that,
out of 10.
yeah, great. Beyond that, I think that's pretty much it. I don't think I have much else to say. Besides shit talk, all these other misinterpretations. Yeah, I saw.
Which do you find more compelling, audience? Our interpretation of it or the standard?
Mm-hmm. It's easy to criticize, but to present something else, an alternative, it's much more difficult.
Indeed, much more difficult. If somebody comes and says like they don't believe like we have it right, they have such a hill to climb. Like you can't disprove this reading by like going and picking out like a couple little passages from like a random chapter. It's not gonna work.
Yeah, well, I mean, kind of related to that, I feel that sort of way about this whole book where it's very easy to criticize Kay and see where he's going wrong, what he's doing wrong. But I think it's very difficult to provide an alternative to, well, what is Kay actually supposed to do? I mean, we've provided some hints, some ideas, but I don't think we even really know.
What should he have done to progress? He should have built a community. He should have been a participant in the community. He should have become a person. I thought you were going to get into, before when we were talking about person, what it means to become a person, but...
Oh yeah, we can go over that.
Become a person.
Yeah, like so given what the failure of being a person is, what it would have taken to be him to become a person, exactly what you said. He had to open up to somebody. He had to make friends. He had to find love some way. And it's not just love about like towards other people. That is the most important thing, really. He didn't have a love for anything, not even a hobby, not even his job. Part of the trial is we didn't even mention this a lot because it doesn't come up a lot actually. But Kay was unhappy from the very beginning. Like everybody knew it.
He took pride in his station, not in his work necessarily. It doesn't seem like he did.
So
he took pride in being in his position, but not in what he was doing. He never even explained.
It's just the clerk, the chief clerk.
Yeah.
Whose duties we never see him do, but I mean, to describe his trial in the concrete terms as opposed to the metaphorical terms of the story. The trial is that he becomes depressed and he dies alone. He dies of loneliness, but he can't even recognize that because he refuses to recognize it. He refuses to believe he needs anybody. He refuses to believe that there's more to life than just, having a station and power tripping over people. He refused to see his own hypocrisy. He refused to see how other people helped him. And so in the end, I mean, right at the last thing he does, he sees somebody reach out of a 2-story window, lean out of the window. They reach out with their hands towards him. And as his last pathetic action, he asks himself all these things. Is that somebody? Is that a friend? Is that somebody who's here to help me? Is this a good person? And he desperately reaches out with his own hands, trying to reach this person, but it's too late and too little. And it's the wrong person anyways. Because yet again, it's just another stranger. It's not somebody that really mattered to Kay. But all right, enough of that. I think we've gone long enough. Despite the fact that, like, when in abstraction, go ahead.
I'm not saying anything in particular. I'm just saying we can go way longer. We could talk about this forever.
No, yeah, like, for some reason, when I'm like recording stuff, my mind tends to blank. But when we turn this off, like, it just fucking turns on again, and just thoughts flow. But yeah, there's a lot more to say about this book. I'm not going to pretend that the reading that I have made is definitively the one reading. There's something that the priest says in the end of in chapter 9, after he has explained and he has had his conversation with Kay about the meaning of the parable of the before the law. And Kay is distraught over the fact that he can't, just from the sheer text, get a definitive, like, singular interpretation that pleases him anyways. And the priest tells him, you don't have to accept that all the interpretations are true. You just have to accept that they're necessary. Likewise, that's what I think of this interpretation. Now, yes, I think I have provided ample evidence to say and show that if any interpretation is true, this is definitely on the very, very strong side of the truth of what this book is about. But that there are other interpretations, though they may not be as true, and some of them I think are just so contradictory to the text itself that objectively I can't call them true. Nonetheless, I can accept that all these interpretations are necessary. That people see in this book precisely what they are capable of seeing, which sounds like a truism. Obviously, well, you see what you can actually see. Well, duh. Yes. But there's more explanation that can be given to that, but I'm not going to bother with it because that just gets into Hegelian stuff. The point is, for people who think that this is about bureaucracy, I can see why they think that. I do. They're wrong. But I understand necessarily why someone would see that. And why would they interpret it? There are people who think that Kay is a hero of this story. That's definitely false, but I understand why necessarily someone might think that. So, while I certainly know that this isn't the final, and I mean, in my own views of aesthetic theory, there can never be a final, full account of an aesthetic artwork. There's always more. An artwork that is a real artwork, a true one, is always contextualized to a radical degree. Like it's just like the law is radically individual in this book, which is why no formal attempts to get at it ever worked. Likewise, an artwork has a radically free determination, where no formal way to get at it is going to ever convey anything. And when you actually get it in its proper way, it will always be contextualized to you. It will be you will understand its universal themes contextualized to you, to your time, to your people, to literally you, the individual. It might be something going on in your life. I certainly interpreted this book in relationship to that as well. So, yeah, plenty of more to be said about this book. In no way do I believe I have exhausted it. I'll probably go back to this book for the rest of my life many times. It's just a great book. I don't know that there's another book that I can do this with. Not go back for the rest of my life, but rather like do this kind of analysis that we did. This book is like at a very sweet spot. It's short enough, dense enough, and entertaining enough. And there's other books that are also worthy of like a really long and deep analysis, but they are much longer. They may be as dense, but a different kind of denseness than this one, which is not as amenable to a free conceptual thinking about it. Because mind you, you may not believe me, but I most of the stuff that I bring to this is not very like deep studied stuff, as far as I'm aware. Like, you know, the stuff that I brought up about Gnosticism and the stuff that I even bring about mysticism is stuff that you can very easily find in, you know, like a 20-minute video if you look up on YouTube. It's not very, very difficult. And most of what I find fascinating is not really related to that, as you notice. I mean, most of what we spent our time talking about is just a story in relationship to itself, and what concepts we see in the story. And it's not like, oh, here's Plato's concept of this. It wasn't even that. It was just like regular everyday concepts. I don't think that we were in any way esoteric about that.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that many books can be read in this way. It's much more difficult. You know, something like Moby Dick has a lot more esoteric stuff that needs a lot more explication and references than this book does. Even something like a Voyage to Arcturus, which I love very much, is not dense enough for me to say very much. Like, a lot of it would just be just sparse commentating. Maybe the closest thing that gets to this is Lilith, where Lilith kind of straddles like the denseness and shortness, entertaining aspect of it. But even then, it's not as dense as this book, this story. So yeah, I don't know if we'll ever do this again with any other narrative story, because this is pretty
I'll rope
unique.
you into something.
Well,
6 years from now, you will read what I recommend you today.
Yeah, we'll definitely try to speed that up. But anyways, for those of you who have listened to the entire series of commentaries, I'm glad you enjoyed it, because obviously you wouldn't be listening anyways if you weren't. I know at least one of you has listened to all of them. I appreciate you very much. You've commented on a lot of the videos.
You've been acquitted. This was our test on you. This is actually all bullshit. And you passed.
Well, you know what Zizek says, you know, never let reality get in the way of good theory.
Yeah.
So anyways, whatever you think of this story, go ahead and share in the comments. I would definitely appreciate knowing what you think about the trial, what importance you think it has, what meaning you think it has, if you disagree with us or not. But all right, see you next time, whenever the hell that is.
Later.